Hello, welcome back. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Oh, I'm so bad at this. Hopefully you've all watched part one, which basically just went over the concepts of how these nanomites would attack some sort of static object. In this video we're going to go step it up a notch and look at some methods we can use to put that similar method onto a skinned character. The channel's just passed 1,000 subscribers, so I'm pretty stoked about that. So just want to say cheers, thanks for all the support. I'll try and keep them coming as much as I can. Ralphie says, thank you. Don't you, Ralphie? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know who you are. You're all a bunch of legends. Cheers. My man! I got the scene set up where I've just got this little character. I just got this from Mixamo. And I stitched together some animations so that he's running and then he gets attacked and then he falls down and dies. So I've got the start object that I want the mites to spawn from, then I've got their little home object over here. For those who haven't seen the part one, I suggest going to watch that so you know actually what I'm doing. But if you already know what I'm doing, I'm just going to quickly set this up so that it's not too time consuming. We'll do a birth, and a 40, position, pick the emitter. Give it some initial speed. Send this out to look for a target. Set the target to random. Make sure it's in the target channel. And exclude this event. Set it to actually find the target to particle target in target channel. Now we want this to loop, so we'll send it out and then we'll send it straight back into here. Then if it doesn't have any more targets, in the target channel, then we'll make it go home. So we'll set this find target to pick this home sphere object. So now they're going to go straight to its home, I reckon. So yeah. Right, so now we'll set up this character to be multiple targets that the nanomites can follow. If we add birth objects, and then we pick both of these meshes, if we do display as geometry, you'll notice that as the mesh runs off, the geometry stays where it is. So these particles will now follow the two objects, just like that, but we want the mesh to go with the actual skin. We need to bind these objects to this skinned mesh. So to do that, we first have to convert the objects to cloth. So just do shape to cloth, and we can turn off display geometry for now. So now we can see that the objects have been converted to cloth because it goes yellow. Now we can choose this object bind, put that in here, and we can pick, so the two soldier parts we've got, we can just add those to selected. We want to do lock to surface. Now it's skinned to the soldier's surface. So we can now turn off the original meshes. Now we can see our cloth deforming with our skinned mesh. But now we want to fracture it up into some parts. But we want to break it up into a part where he hasn't really got any pieces close together. So like, see how his arm is really close to his body? Also his knee here, his legs are quite close together. If we break this up into pieces now, when we bind them together, the binds are going to stick to one another in this pose. So this leg will actually be stuck to the other leg, and likewise up here, this arm will be stuck to this arm. We don't have to break him up into pieces from the very start, because we want to keep him in skin mesh as long as possible. So we'll get to a frame where he's sort of opened a bit more. So about here he's starting to get attacked. So maybe where's a good spot? Like maybe there, so at 42. So you can see now his legs are further apart, his arms are way out from his body. So now if we break him up into pieces and bind the pieces together, they're not going to be so his hand won't be sticking to his body and his legs won't be stuck together. And now we'll do a property test. We'll do event age, and we'll do, if it's equal to 42, we'll send it out and we'll break up the meshes. So we'll go Voronoi we'll send it out into here. You can see now it just goes all weird and it breaks up the cloth. It doesn't actually break up into objects. So we want to convert the cloth at this frame. We want to convert it back into an object. So we'll just go cloth. We'll do another cloth bind, and now instead of binding it to cloth, we're going to do cloth to shape. So now it's going to convert the cloth at frame 42. It's going to convert the cloth back to a shape, and then it's going to break it up into Voronoi fractures. I'll turn display to geometry. So here we go, see now, so bang. So now if I go to wireframe, you can see it's actually split up into some fractures. So we'll just give it, let's just change the variation off, and we'll give it, for this exercise, we'll just break it up into, say, 200 pieces. If I just added, say, physics shape to this, so you can see now, run, boom. So you can do some cool effects. So that's how you can sort of like, you know, say it was like War of the Worlds and he comes along and he gets, you know, zapped by a laser. He'll just fall into these crumbles straight away. But you notice how he stops and then he just falls and there's nothing really happening. So we would want to keep this velocity going if we were going to do something like this. But we don't want to do this effect. We want to actually keep these pieces stuck to his body as he keeps going. So I'll get rid of this for now. Now what we want to do is we want to bind all these particles like we did with the surface. So we'll just do object bind again. We'll just drag this in, shift drag into here. So now we'll bind these to the same parts of the body again. So we'll see what happens now. So now he runs up and then he breaks up and then his pieces are now bound to his skin. There's something that's going a bit haywire, and that's usually because of scale. So we'll just untick scale so that it doesn't scale up. But anyway, so now his pieces are following the skin mesh. We need to break it up a bit more accurately. So we've got huge chunks at the moment. So we can just go back into TyFlow and we can increase the fracture amount to, let's give it 1,000. Jeez, dogs. So you can see now by fracturing it into more parts, it's fractured a lot more accurately, so it's sticking to its skin mesh a lot better. These huge chunks in this object are actually bigger than the chunks in its head. That's because it's doing this for each of these two objects. So you've got the body mesh and the head. It's fracturing them both 1,000 times. So it's fracturing the head 1,000 times and it's fracturing the head 1,000 times. So the breaks aren't going to be a consistent size throughout the body. One way around this is just to use one skin mesh. But if you don't use one skin mesh, we can just simply separate these at the start. So when it goes to the frame where it converts it back to an object, we can just turn off Voronoi and the object bind for now. And we can see, so when it snaps, and now it's two objects. So what we can do is we can actually do a display data in here and see how it says birth ID ticked up here. So now we can see which IDs they are. So we can see that it's birthing 12,222 and 12,221. So now that we know the IDs that it's making for these two meshes, we can now split them up. We can do a property test, and we can say if the birth ID is equal to 12,221, too many twos, 221, then we'll just drag this one out here. So now we'll send it into the Voronoi fracture test. Give it a color so we can see what's happening. So maybe green. And then we'll copy this one. And we'll just shift drag this. And now we'll drag this into this event. And we'll change the ID to, what was it? 12,222. And now we'll give this a color of, say, reddish or pink. And now you'll see that it's going to be separated into their own Voronoi fracture events. So now it breaks into its events, and now we have complete control over how many fractures we have, so we can get more of a, so we can change this to be less dense and this one to be more dense. So with our Voronoi fractures in our green head, for example, we'll probably change that down to, say, 200. And now we've got more of a consistent breakage between the head and the rest of the body. So now that we've broken them up into two events, into their own fractures, we can now put this object bind as another event,
and put them both. We can now merge them straight back into the same. So they've only branched off to break them up individually, and now they've got back on track here, and now we can manipulate them all the same. So now the next step is to have more control over these breaking parts. Like see here, you can see this whole hand chunk is missing, and it's really big, and we don't want it to be so big. But if we start changing the value of the Voronoi fractures too much, like too little, well, it's gonna break it evenly over the surface. So it's gonna have little tiny fractures in here, and it's gonna it's gonna be really hard to get these little fractures to be smaller than the rest. So what we can do is, the way Voronoi fractures work is, if we go into these settings for it, we can tell it to break up based on a texture. Where the texture is white, it's going to break up into more dense pieces, and where the texture is black, it's going to break up into hardly any pieces. So I created a map for the character where it's around its hands and feet, they're white, they're going to break up into smaller pieces, and then his arms and legs are going to be sort of middle ground, and then as he gets towards his torso, they're going to be a lot thicker. So if I go back into the fractures for the body, and if I scroll down and set it to say on shape surface, now if I get the material up, you see here's the material I made. So if I drag that into the texture, you can see now it's broken up. See, all the fingers and everything's broken up to be smaller, and even in the boot. So we have more control over which parts break up. So we don't need it to break up as much inside the body, but we need it to break up more on these little parts, so the fingers and everything can bend. But we don't want to break up everything so crazily, so our computer, starts chugging. So that's one way around keeping it a little bit more accurate. So now that we've done that, we can even break it up. We can go more to, say, instead of 1,000, we can change it even higher. So when we're happy with how everything's working, we can just up these when we start getting to the final polish stage. But for now, we'll keep it like this. I'll just go into the Nanomite settings, and I'll change the speed so that they actually go quite quick. Let's see what this does. Yep, so now they're targeting all those little pieces quite good, so they're more like nanomites now attacking the guy. So do the same thing we did. Now that they're going so fast, we'll have to add a slow in. So add a slow. So now when they reach the guy, they sort of they don't go too far away. They linger around more. Now it's time to get the mites to eat the little pieces of him up. So now we want to do the same thing we did in the part 1. So we'll do a property test, and we'll check for neighbours that is greater than or equal to 1. So we're looking for one neighbour, and remember we don't want to look for neighbours within itself. We only want to look for it in the nanomite particles simulation. So we'll give the nanomites the simulation group. So in particle groups, and then we'll set this to particles group 1, and now in our neighbours test, we'll set it to only check for neighbours in simulation group 1, so it's only checking for the ones in this particle system. And now when it's in a radius of, say, that's 2 centimeters, we'll just delete them to see what it looks like first. Alright, so let's just start. Yep, so it's working, so it's eating all the pieces up. So I might just, for the fine target, I might just increase the acceleration to a little bit higher, so 7.5, so the particles sort of accelerate a lot quicker. Alright, so that works just for a test, so we just deleted it for a test. So now we'll go in and we'll make them work actually how we want. So we won't do the delete anymore. What we're going to do, so we're going to do the same thing we did for the previous tutorial, where we scale them down. So once they hit here, so we'll do timing, continuous, and we'll scale them down 90%, and then we'll do a property test and say if their scale is less than or equal to, let's just do 0.1, and now we will send them into this delete function. Alright, so now it's getting, as the particles hit it, you can see the particles are they're going to that new event, and they're scaling down, and then they're deleting themselves. But they're they're staying in place. So now we have to add physX to this event so that they will fall with physics, basically. Alright, so now you can see all the pieces are coming off and they're falling down and, you know, scaling down and getting eaten by these bugs. It's a little bit hard to see with all these bugs. So I'm just going to turn the display off for now so you can only see the character, see what's actually happening. So you can see now, see it's all crumbling down around him. Ooh. So he's sort of turning into some crumbly mess. You know, look at me. Would you like some human crumble for dessert? Oh, yes, please. You might think to yourself, oh, this isn't perfect. That doesn't look like a, you know, person's skin, all these blocks and stuff. And, you know, you'd be right. But it's basically just try and get some concepts from this and apply them to your own ideas and what you want to do with them. So this is just a few, just basically going over some concepts of how to get some effects, basically. So he's got a huge gap in his leg, and it's still bound to his body. So as he comes down and hits the ground, you know, that wouldn't happen in real life because he actually has nothing connecting him together. Similarly to the previous tutorial, we want to actually bind all these together, and then we want to check to say if it's not connected to something to one family of binds anymore, then we're going to break it off. So for this example, we can create a family of binds just within the torso, and then we can say if these binds here aren't connected to the torso anymore, then we can break all these ones off separately, so therefore it won't follow the skin anymore. It will just go out into the world. And likewise with the arm. So if the arm at the shoulder here gets broken, we can check to say if the arm's network is not connected to the torso, just make the arm fall off. But we obviously have to set up a bind network first. Instead of setting up the physX shape only when I was about to call it a Marmite. Yeah, so instead of setting up the physX shape when the nanomite gets close to the particle shape, what we're going to do is we're actually going to set that up inside. We're going to set that up from the very start. So as soon as the objects get broken up, they're bound to the surface skin. Then we're going to set up the physX shape straight off the bat. All right, so as he comes in and these break up, you can see if you set them to physX shapes straight away, they're all going to interact with each other, and it's just going to go, everything's going to go nuts. So it's going to be like, oh, so it's really crap. So we want to make sure that we set the in the physX shape, we set collisions to ignore start penetrations, and that's going to help it a little bit, but it's not going to fix the problem. So what we really want to do is we want to actually set the objects to kinematic instead. So we'll just add the physX switch in here, and we'll set it to kinematic. Alright, so you can see now, so we've got our shapes, and they're set to physX shapes, but they're not going haywire as before. So now what we can do is we can set up some bindings for these shapes. So we can chuck in a bind. We want to set all these binds up to bind together as particles, because when we break them up, say the arm falls off, we want to keep the arm as still a network of bound particles. So we'll just leave these how they are. So we'll just set these up as binds. And then what we want to do is we'll just duplicate this bind effect here, and we'll set this to binding ID 1, and then we want to set this to, say, the torso. So we want to say that the torso is binding ID network 1. So we will need to get out we'll unhide the rig, and now we'll go in here and we'll select the, where does it say the spine? So the spine's there. Let's say spine 1. There we go. So the spine 1 is pretty much central to the torso. So what we'll do is in the bind network for ID 1, we'll go down here, and instead of proximity bind, we'll untick that. We'll go down to point bind, and then make sure particles is ticked, and then we'll pick the object we've got selected. So it's the spine 1. You can't see now, but if I go to wireframe, you can see really faintly, see this purple circle here? That's the point. So that's the point bind that we've got for ID 1. So if we go into show bindings, you can see now inside his chest, you see these are all now bound together inside his chest with ID 1. So it's creating a network where all these other binds around the body have a network to associate to this torso area. So now we know if this arm gets separated from this network, we want the arm to just, you know, break off and fall somewhere. So we can turn off show bindings for now, and let's get this back. So now if we go back to the start, we can add a property test like we did in part 1. We can do a bind search. So we can say bind search if it is less than or equal to 0 in physx binds ID 1. So now it's like saying, is our binding network connected to the torso binds? And if it's not, we can then break it up. So we can say, firstly, what we have to do is we have to set the physx shape to dynamic. So, because at the moment it's kinematic. So first, what we'll do is if it's not connected anymore, we'll put this into this event, which now, if I set it to geometry, set it to a color of say blue. Alright, so it's not working as expected. Looks like everything is just breaking straight up. The reason it's not working is because we actually put these out in the wrong order. So when I set it to physx shape and I set it to kinematic, after that it's not binding. These aren't binding together. So we want to actually bind these together first, and then after we've bound all the particles together, now we want to switch it to kinematic. Alright, so now it's working as expected. You can see obviously here with the front of the boot and his finger, they end up losing binds, so they end up going off into the world on their own, sort of like that. So boom. So now see the foot is broken off. Ooh, computer's chugging a bit. So these little floating pieces now, because we took the physx out of this event, we need to, instead of adding it back in there, we'll just add the, where is it? We'll just do the physx switch, and we'll just activate the physx shape in here again. And we can also do, for these parts here that break off on their own, we can do the same test. So we can do a neighbours test. We can just shift drag this in here, so that it does the exact same test that these ones do, but these are just broken off onto their own. And the same test, if they do happen to get eaten by a Nanomite, we'll just put it into this same event here. And now everything for now should work out pretty good, and we just need to adjust all the settings. Because we also added the bindings, now what we want it to do is when it gets hit by a mite, so in this event, this is the one where a nanomite interacts with it, we also want to break the bind so that the pieces aren't all bound together anymore. So we'll just do physx break, and we'll do break all. Alright, so now you can see as he comes through, see how as the mites eat through his arm, see his arm comes off and then falls to the ground, and it's its own unique little bind and its world, doing its own things, and likewise with everything else. So as the mites keep eating away, so now you can see they've eaten off his leg, so they've eaten through here on his leg, so his leg's now going to go out into the world as its own object, and likewise to everything else. So it's just going to keep falling away around it, and the mites are just going to finish everything off as they go through. Show these mites again, you can see now, so they're going in and they're eating him up. Munch, 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 and then they're finishing off all the other objects, and they'll just keep doing that. And once they've finished eating these objects, they're obviously going to piss off back to the sphere. So pretty much that's the basic idea. There's not really much else involved in what I did with that other scene. I basically just added in a bit of Phoenix FD fluid just for a bit of blood. I figured that the nanomites would eat everything they can find, especially if they're just eating organic stuff. They're probably going to eat him all up and they're not going to leave any blood, but I thought, screw it, I wanted to see some blood anyway, so I just left it in there. Pretty much now you just tweak some settings, so keep tweaking until you're happy with the way the nanomites are going. Obviously increase all your Voronoi fragments so that he's less blocky, so he doesn't look so blocky, and he's more sort of trying to make him look more natural. And also one thing you'll notice here is see as he comes down and his leg falls off, and now his other leg falls off. He's obviously, his torso now should fall to the ground, but it doesn't because it's still skin to the character, and that's because our point that we're using as reference is the torso. So in this case, you might want to change it to something else. So you might want to go, you know, back here and change it to, say, maybe this foot. So this foot was the anchor point. Then everything that's not connected to this foot anymore is going to fall off. But obviously, this is just up to you. It's based on your scene. It's based on how things are set up. So you can change this as you go. So you know, now we could obviously change it from the torso to this foot. And one thing I do suggest is, seeing as this doesn't have to rely on automation like it is, we're you know, setting up a shot to be more specific to what it is. What I do suggest is not relying too much on the automation of this and actually breaking things off manually. So we can set up an object, say if we go back here and say this is cool, but I want the arm to break off here. Well, we can just manually, you know, animate an object to interact with his shoulder here, and say when the shoulder interacts with the object, just break the binds the same way we do any other way, and then his arm's just going to fall off. And we can just do that around to any other object we want, so we got more control over how he breaks up. And obviously we can set up the mites to eat him and try and leave his legs first, leave his legs till last, so that all his body parts can break off as he's going, and eventually when he falls to the ground, it's going to look more natural because his legs are going to stay together. So it's just a lot of tweaking from here. And also remember to, if you're having any issues like things are exploding and particles are shooting off into nowhere, remember to up these steps, and also change the time step to, say, half a frame, just for a bit more accuracy. And that most of the time that usually stops any popping and weird unwanted things. But yeah, basically that's it on how you can go about setting up this character to, you know, get attacked by these things. Oh, look at them go! Oh, yum 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 yum. Anyway, so yeah, cheers. Thanks for watching. I hope you put some of these techniques to good use. Yeah, cheers.